Picture this. You drop 100 people smack in the middle of the wilderness. On one side, you've got hardcore technical expertise. On the other, just the sheer power of social cohesion. Welcome to our latest explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive and honestly fascinating social experiment that stripped survival down to its rawest elements. We're going to explore a wild scenario where knowing how to build a fire from scratch might actually be less important than just knowing how to get along with your neighbor. So here's the $250,000 question. Can 50 complete amateurs genuinely outlast 50 seasoned survival experts? I know, it sounds like a totally ridiculous matchup. But as we're about to see, the wilderness has a pretty funny way of leveling the playing field. This whole challenge revolves around a massive ticking clock and a prize pool that fundamentally flips how these two groups interact with each other.
Right out of the gate, the divide is wild. First up, we've got the blue team, 50 hardcore survival experts. We're talking about people who do this for fun, bragging about spending months out in the woods. They rolled up with virtually no gear, armed with just their deep, specialized knowledge. Then you've got the red team, 50 everyday amateurs who freely admitted they probably aren't cut out for the wilderness. But they got a massive early advantage, a literal shopping spree. They decked out their camp with kids' tents, tarps, lighters, massive pallets of bottled water, and hilariously, absolute junk food like Party Mix.
Now here is the absolute pressure cooker of the whole experiment, $250,000. The rules are simple. Whichever team has the most people left standing when help finally arrives splits this massive pile of cash. But think about the paradox that creates. You desperately need your teammates to stay so your team has the highest headcount to win. But the more people who stay, the faster your extremely limited resources are going to drain. It's a total catch-22. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Shelter and Early Advantages.
Before anyone could even think about food or the prize money, they had to tackle their very first hurdle, surviving the rapidly dropping nighttime temperatures. The blue team, guided by a survivalist named Seth, immediately got to work building these massive, immaculate debris shelters. They piled on leaves literally a foot thick to create natural insulation, perfectly designed to withstand heavy rain and trap body heat. Meanwhile, the red team, they simply pitched the flimsy kids' tents they snagged at the store, laid down some ground tarps, and jokingly called it the Four Seasons.
But wow, here is where we hit our very first major irony. You'd totally think the amateurs would be the first to break, right? Nope. The absolute first people to quit the experiment on day one were actually blue team survival experts. Just like this quote perfectly captures, despite all that deep knowledge, some of them physically couldn't handle sleeping on the freezing, wet ground without modern comforts. Meanwhile, the red team was sleeping pretty soundly in their cushy sleeping bags inside those cheap store-bought tents. Moving right along to Section 2, the Hunger Games.
Well, that store-bought advantage turned out to be a massive double-edged sword. As we shift into the next phase of survival, the red team's reliance on their initial supplies quickly becomes their biggest nightmare. By day 4, the party mix and snacks were totally wiped out. An intense, gnawing hunger set in. But the really fascinating part is how these two camps responded to starvation with completely polar opposite strategies. The blue team experts, fully knowing the brutal reality of wilderness caloric deficits, started hiding food. They made secret caches in the woods, and some members even hoarded potatoes in their own private sheds, which sparked massive distrust. The red team? They took a totally different route. They established a strict community pantry, surviving on literally a single apple a day per person, just to make sure absolutely no one was left out.
That brings us to Section 3, Teamwork versus Infighting.
This whole food divide really highlights something profound. As the days dragged on, the physical game totally took a backseat. The psychological makeup of the camps became vastly more important than knowing how to build a fire. We're literally shifting from wilderness survival to social endurance. And the blue team, they were an absolute powder keg. Think about it. You put 50 Type A survivalists together, and you get 50 people who all want to be the boss. As one expert put it, being naturally oppositionally defiant is a pretty terrible trait when you're starving and trying to coordinate. All this constant friction, petty arguments over how to wipe a counter or who gets to eat led to massive frustration and a huge wave of experts just packing up and leaving.
But just across the river, a completely different culture was brewing. The red team, amateurs didn't have huge egos about their survival skills, mostly because, well, they didn't have any skills. Their entire mantra became communal sacrifice. When someone got hungry and wanted more food, the group stepped right in to enforce sharing. They genuinely bonded over their shared misery, basically declaring that they were going to survive this thing together or not at all. And that leads us to Section 4, Psychological Challenges.
Of course, simply sitting around in the woods waiting wouldn't make for much of an experiment. To really test these opposing social structures, the creators threw in specific interventions to push these starving, isolated groups straight to their mental breaking points. Just look at how rapidly things escalated. From the initial junk food feast on day 1 to the grim, harsh reality of starvation by day 4. The real hurdles smacked them on day 8 with a devastating weather event, and then day 14 brought what was probably the cruelest psychological test of the entire shebang. Let's break down how these milestones completely shattered both camps.
Right before the storm hit, the teams faced a massive test of trust, the 50-can challenge. Both teams were handed a sack of 50 cans of food. The rules were simple but brutal. Whichever team returned the most unopened cans after 72 hours would win a huge reward. But if they tied, nobody got anything. And what happened? A total zero-sum failure. The blue team paranoidly hid their cans deep in the woods so nobody could eat them. The red team, terrified that the experts were starving and would cheat by opening theirs, rigidly buried their own stash. So both teams starved for 3 excruciating days, both returned exactly 50 cans, and both won absolutely nothing.
The fallout from that challenge was instant and devastating. I mean, imagine starving yourself for 72 straight hours while literally staring at a can of beef, only to find out all your suffering was completely in vain. Talk about a psychological gut punch. The very second the tie was announced, 3 completely enraged red team members just snapped. They immediately lit their exit flares and quit, completely crushing the morale of the amateur camp in the process.
And hey, as if the intense hunger wasn't bad enough, on day 8, Mother Nature decided to strike back with full force. Temperatures plummeted well below freezing, leaving a thick layer of frost on the trees and literally freezing the airplane chairs someone had left in the camp. Then came a massive, relentless 5-hour rainstorm. The fire pits were entirely flooded out, and for the red team, their big store-bought advantage finally failed them completely. Their tents, their shoes, their sleeping bags, absolutely soaked to the bone.
That storm brilliantly illustrates the insane toll of the elements. That single night of freezing rain caused 8 immediate eliminations. 6 people from the red team tapped out because their cheap gear just couldn't hold up. But shockingly, 2 from the blue team quit as well, simply because their morale broke. Even though the blue team's fancy debris shelters worked exactly as intended and kept the heavy rain out, the overarching misery, the poison ivy all over the place, and the severe sleep deprivation proved to be just too much, even for the experts.
Let's dive into Section 5, the ultimate temptation.
This brings us to day 14, and wow, the ultimate psychological test. The remaining survivors were severely depleted, both in numbers and spirit. Then, they were presented with a high-stakes auction designed to test literally everything they valued. Both teams were given identical sets of mysterious boxes, with items revealed one by one. If a team hit their button to claim a box, the other team got nothing. They agonized as incredible items popped up. Fishing gear? Passed. Cast iron pans? Passed. Then came pure torture. Peanut butter cups and milk chocolate. Can you imagine the sheer willpower it takes for a starving person to stare at chocolate and reject it, just so the other team wouldn't be left with nothing? Incredible. Finally, they even passed on some desperately needed building supplies.
Because, you see, here was the absolutely brilliant catch to this whole twisted game. If neither team hit the button on any of the boxes, both teams would magically receive every single item. The game was actively preying on their paranoia. Since the camps were separated by a river with zero cross-team communication, they had to rely entirely on blind faith. They just had to pray the opposing camp wouldn't crack and selfishly slam the button first.
As the experiment grinded on and the numbers dwindled, something truly incredible started happening within the amateur red team. Stripped of all their initial comforts and facing brutal, cold realities, the remaining folks really stepped up. When their designated chef tapped out, others immediately jumped in to chop carrots and stretch out the meager rations. They went through this profound emotional growth, discovering deep resilience and taking on real leadership roles they honestly never knew they had in them.
Which brings us to the ultimate irony of this whole explainer. Just look at the stark contrast in where these groups ended up. The blue team, despite having literally every technical skill you could ever need to thrive in the woods, ended up super individualistic, fragmented by massive egos, and just thoroughly miserable. On the flip side, the red team, who started out sleeping in flimsy kids' tents and snacking on party mix, became incredibly community-focused. They adapted, formed a highly cohesive unit, and actively worked to keep each other emotionally in the game. So it leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought. When you are stripped of absolutely everything,
pushed to the brink of starvation, and dropped into a brutal, zero-sum environment, what is your absolute greatest survival tool? Is it knowing how to build a perfect debris shelter and start a fire from nothing, or is it knowing how to build trust, share a single apple, and forge a real community? It's definitely something to chew on the next time you find yourself stuck working on a difficult team. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning what it really takes to survive.